Yes. I did not let him proofread it, look at it, get his opinion, nothing else. So here we go.
We can approve it later.
This segment was on the effects of grief. I did want to start out by saying, the first session, Esther led it, and she is a trained counselor. And then Victor led the second one, and of course he's an ordained minister, and I am neither of those things. All I am standing before you is a grieving mother. All I am is someone who has walked that path and experienced that pain. And so what you see put before you are the things that spoke to me, that touched me, that ministered to me. And so, initially, when everything happened with Zach's death, which was actually somewhat unexpected for Leonard and I, because God had carried us so many times when we thought that Zach was not going to make it, and then he would pull him back up. And maybe part of it too was because we just couldn't seem to grasp losing him. And so when it actually came, it was somewhat unexpected, and it shook both of us. And I think I can say that fairly on his behalf as well to our foundation. And I had such a need to understand. And I began to seek books to read, to try to grasp what God's purpose was. Why did this happen? I knew that people got miracles. Why didn't we get ours? And, a lot of questions that you ask yourself. Was my faith not strong enough? Was Zach's not strong enough? Was there something that I didn't repent of? And just trying to understand all the emotions that go into it. And how long is this going to last? And why am I experiencing this? And is this normal? So it opened up to wanting to learn and understand, to try to cope. So some of this material that you see before you are different books. I looked at several different materials, and these were ones that kind of affected me in one way or the other. And that's what I wanted to kind of share. The first one that you see mentioned on there is by Elizabeth Brown, who wrote a book called Surviving the Loss of a Child. And in the book, she talks about she and her husband is a doctor. He's a pediatrician. Their third child died at the age of 6, and her illness was not caught by her husband. And they talk about that grief of him being a doctor and he not being able to see the symptoms. And a lot of what she said actually paralleled somewhat with what we had gone through with the whole medical side of a sick child. And still praying for that miracle, and then still getting to that point of realizing that it just wasn't going to happen. So they had 4 children. This little girl that died was their 3rd child. And she had a lot of statistics, and those are the ones that I wanted to share that spoke to me. Because when I looked at those statistics, I realized at that point, I have a choice to make. If I'm going to let myself fall apart and fall into one of those categories, or am I going to move forward? Am I going to try to be stronger? What kind of witness am I going to be for the Lord? When people look at me and watch me, what am I going to do? So it was my choice. And I looked at those, and you can see those statistics in front of you. And they're pretty tough. And, one of the things that she points out, one of the things that the other authors that I read, and most of my books dealt with the loss of a child, is that it's one of the most difficult things that you can go through because it's not natural. You're not supposed to bury your children. You can kind of anticipate that, you or your spouse is going to go. You know that you expect you're going to bury your parents. You can even accept it with a sibling, but you don't anticipate it with your child. And that's why it tends to be so much tougher on people who walk that particular path. So I had her number statistics on there. The second part that you see is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is who Esther talked about in that first session. This lady is the guru of the grieving process. She spent most of her adult life studying people that are grieving. She's one of the founders of the Hospice Society, which I did not know that until I was looking at some of the research that she'd done. So what I got to tell you quite honestly, just reading her book and looking at her, I did not get the sense that she was a born-again Christian. So what you see when you look at her work is really a secular viewpoint, but it's also pretty true of what we walk through and what we experience. There's nothing on there that's really too shocking. You know, I look at anger. She talks about anger. You can see that description. And I think every single one of us that has experienced a loss that has touched us to our very core have been angry at something, whether it's God. In my case, starting out, it was the doctors at MD Anderson. Now, I don't think Leonard felt that way, but I did. And I felt like, you need to try harder. You got to keep going. You can't just stop. This is my son. So a lot of mine was actually directed at MD Anderson, which probably wasn't fair. Because when I reflect on it now, I do think that they gave it all that they could give, but it didn't feel like it at the time. So, for my personal experience, depression, I don't think you're human if you don't experience depression with the loss of someone that you love that deeply. And it is a roller coaster, absolutely. And for a long time, I could not hardly, through the month of June, make myself get up in the morning. And I knew I had to. And I kept thinking, there were two things that I had prayed for. Father, can you take away the painful memories, those days in that hospital, those last days? Can you take them from my mind? I want to stop going there. And the second thing was, when will I feel normal? When will I feel like I used to, where I want to get up in the morning and I want that joy, I want my joy restored. And it took a while, but I can honestly say, as I stand here 6 months later, He has restored joy to me. I have enthusiasm to get up in the morning. I see joy in things in my life. I miss my son. It's an incredible thing. But I have joy. I have peace. It's hard to describe to you exactly what that is. But I know I feel it. I know I could decorate for Christmas. I know I find happiness in simple things again. And I know I don't drag to get out of that bed in the morning. And the only way you can do that after that kind of loss is through Christ. That's it. There is no other explanation. On the second page, she goes through more of what she experienced, and as you look at that list and what you've had in your own life, I'm sure you recognize those different things. If I skip down to, and I look at number 5, regrets. Again, I don't think we're human if we don't have regrets. Ours focused on, in the beginning, why didn't we catch it sooner? Why didn't we take him the first time he said that his leg hurt? Why did we sit on it and make excuses? And, you know, the coaches would tell me, well, you know, they're lifting weights a lot, and they're not letting them rest between that time. And, you know, and I just sat on it instead of moving him quicker. At MD Anderson, one of the last doctors that we spoke with told us that by the time he had pain, it would have already been too late. And I could have taken him at that point, and I might have bought myself a couple more months. And that was the extent of it. And you know, that's one of those things that I will never, ever have the answer to. And I found that it was pointless for me to go over the regrets, because it doesn't add anything to my life. And it will not change the past. All it does is steal my joy and keep me suppressed. And it's a battle. You know, the other things that I found that I regretted is all the times I fussed at him. I fussed at him a lot. I fussed at all our kids a lot. And Zach himself freed me of a lot of that. I guess I had one advantage with this illness. It gave me an opportunity to tell him all the time, which I told him I loved him all the time. And I learned a lot of that from Leonard Ashley. Very loving man. And that's one of the things that he would say to me regularly, and he always told our kids. And on one particular evening, I said, Zach, you remember that time that I jumped all over you about your room? And I screamed and hollered at you, and I told you that I'm tired of all these little pieces of artwork that you have, 1,000 pieces, and you need to get rid of all this? And he looked at me and he said, I don't even remember that. And I said, well, I do. And I want to say, I'm sorry. And he says, Mom, I forgive you all. Every time that my mind goes to those kind of things, I hear him say in my head, I forgive you all. Don't talk to me about that stuff anymore. And in some ways, it kind of symbolized to me really how Jesus feels about us. I forgive you all. And that just does so much to help us to restore our joy when you think about it.